unit development, they're going to say, okay, I know that per acre price in the calculation, which we'll go over, is going to be 7.4 to 8.2 million. So it provides transparency and certainty for developers. We'll move on. So just keep this in mind. These are the numbers that are published in the master fee schedule. And now, as I promised, we'll get into the calculation of the in lieu fee. So in this example, it's never this perfect, but I did this just for ease of calculation. We're going to assume it's a 1 acre site development, that there are 60 units going into this development. There's 15 existing units that are going to be demolished. This is important because any units that are existing and demolished don't have a park in lieu fee to pay. We assume that they've paid it at some point in time. And they're dedicating 5 BMR units, which is also exempt from the ultimate calculation. And in this instance, the land value is $13 million per acre. So we go to the density formula, which is found in chapter 41. You'll see it on the bottom right-hand corner. Since it is 60 units, it's a high density. So the density factor that we plug in is 0.0060. And then we have 40 units that are going to be charged the park in lieu fee. That takes out the BMR units and the existing units. So that's how we got to 40. And we're going to assume that it's $13 million an acre based on that master fee schedule. So that gets to $3.12 million is the park in lieu fee for this residential development. And that comes out to $78,000 per unit. I give that per unit cost to planning, and then they plug it in to their formula to determine how many are, if the development changes, what that price is. So it's been really effective having that master fee schedule of the appraised values up. Any questions on the calculation? I know we've go over this every year. Yeah.
So the land value, that's the land value of the housing site, or the appraised value categories that you showed in the previous?
Yeah, so it's the per acre price.
That's just generally established for the high density residential.
Yeah, whatever density factor we're going to be calculating. So since it was 60 units, it would be the medium high to high density. So the 12.6 million to 13.9 million. So they would be in that range.
I was trying to figure it out if that was the parkland or the land that the housing was being built on.
Oh, the land that the housing was being built on.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's no discount for acquiring parkland.
Yeah, exactly.
And the price per square foot in this table is used in the calculation.
So for 43,560 square feet equals an acre. Yeah, so sometimes people like to see it as a square foot, and some people like to see it as an acre. So
remind me again, you do not differentiate between different parts of town on valuation, or do you?
I do, and that's why there's a range.
That's the range. Okay.
Yeah, that's the range. So depending on where it's located, it would be in that range. So it provides flexibility.
So when you publish the numbers, do you publish it in a more detailed fashion with segments of town?
No, it's giving a range for flexibility to take in account of location and also number of units, but it doesn't break it down into sections of town. And that would be hard because this appraisal and most appraisals are based on comparables. So maybe not every planning area has had a sale to have an equal comparable.
No other questions?
Okay, so that's just an overview of the in lieu fees. So what have we done for parkland acquisition in the past year since we met? Well, I just like to remind everybody of how challenging it can be to acquire parkland in the city of Mountain View. We're a built-out urban area, so there isn't a lot of large vacant spaces to acquire. Also, we'd like to have willing sellers for our parks, so you have to be convincing on the acquisition, and people need to want to sell. And parks also need a large footprint. If we're in a residential neighborhood, just say Montaloma, for example, where the houses are about 6,000 square feet, that would require several parcels to be acquired contiguously to develop a park, or acquisition of a property next to a park to expand it. So those are some of the challenges when real estate goes out and is considering an acquisition. But last year we were able to acquire several park parcels. There was 7-Eleven Calderon in the central planning area. That is 0.63 acres. And we closed on that one. So that's great. And then also in the Sterling Park planning area, we acquired 2 parcels, 909 and 917 San Rafael. And that's approximately 1.66 acres. And then the third property we acquired is 538 Thompson. And that's in the Thompson planning area in the Montaloma neighborhood. And this was interesting. Like I said, most of those properties are about 6,000 square feet. This one was 13,000 square feet. So we did have some success in the parkland acquisitions last year. And then as far as future parks, there are a few that there's been a dedicated and construction park at 400 San Antonio. There's a dedicated and not yet construction at 555 East Evelyn. The Villa Street future dedications are 555 West Middlefield, Middlefield and North Bayshore Master Plan for Google. That's going to be 4 to 6 parks. And then future parks with the Los Altos School District site. So this is just a snapshot of real estate, where we are, where we're going. And I'd love to open it up to any additional questions that you guys may have.
Commissioner Summer?
Yes, I was wondering if the city ever pursues grant funding for park acquisition, because there are a lot of state funds, especially in disadvantaged communities.
We haven't explored that opportunity, but I do think that's something worth looking into.
Yeah, that would be useful.
Commissioner Davis?
Is acquired property required to be developed as parkland using the in lieu fees? In other words, could land be accumulated later, sought or brokered and sold or brokered in a way to put parcels together? In other words, could you acquire land as investment property to ultimately use for park space somewhere else? Does that make any sense?
Kind of. I think Lindsay's going to go over the park planning areas and the funding for those park planning areas.
Yeah.
So when we acquire parks, so those are the park planning areas. And when a development is built, just say in the San Antonio park planning area, the money we get from that development is used in that development area. So we can't, have funds coming from San Antonio and buy something in Westman with those funds. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does partially. So if there's a developer has a piece of land and he says, okay, I'm gonna dedicate this adjacent or this part of the property to the city.
Mm-hmm.
Can the city say, okay, we'll take deed of that, but we're gonna sell it and use those proceeds to combine with other things we have over here in that same planning area?
Oh, kind of like an exchange. Yeah. We haven't done that before, and I think it might be problematic because that money needs to stay in the park planning area ultimately. So, and the thinking is, if you're building a development, people in that park planning area are going to want to use a park that's nearby. So using money, so say 1,000 units go up in one area, and you don't have enough park in that area, you need to develop a park for those residents. And so using it in a different area, I don't think that's allowed. But an exchange option,
I was thinking,
yeah,
maybe in the same planning area, but combining, some more appropriate, favorable properties that aren't necessarily this specific one.
That isn't what was dedicated. Yeah. So like a mix and match of using what was dedicated to acquire in perhaps a better location. Yeah, that hasn't been done. And dedications aren't that common. I mean, for the larger developments,
take the fees.
They'll usually pay the in lieu fee, because if you think about it, taking a development and dedicating at least 0.4 acres, you're giving up a lot of money for what you could develop on that site.
Last question. Are you working with Next Practice Partner in the Park Strategic Plan team on creative financing ideas?
I've been tangentially involved in conversations, but
Yeah, when we get to that point in the plan development process, we may bring Angela to the table to share information on the process with our consultant. But we haven't quite made it to that part yet.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Commissioner.
Yeah, it's always great to see you guys once a year. Happy New Year.
Before we lose you.
Yeah, no, I'm here. I'm here all
open up the
night.
item to the public. Do we have anybody speaking to this item?
I have a question to you. So
Sure.
how do you decide about these units which you are choosing for?
Sorry, so for public comment,
Oh, sorry.
no, I just let you know, you'll have 3 minutes
Okay.
to speak. And then if you have a question, staff may not necessarily answer directly.
Sure, yeah,
Yeah,
that's fine.
so I'll just start your timer, just so you.
And also, before you leave, if you could fill out one of the blue cards so we.
Sure, I'll do
Okay.
that.
And
Okay,
welcome.
thank you.
Feel free to use the podium if you like.
Yeah, that's a lot of attention. Hi, I'm Sumesh. I just want to know, like, how do you decide upon the units? So for instance, Montaloma, right? I live in Montaloma district or neighborhood. So how do you decide those units which you have to choose? For instance, is it on this particular road that you're gonna choose these number of units? Is it based on age of that property, or like, how did you decide that that's the section where you're gonna have that park, and what are the units that you're gonna demolish? Or yeah, that's the question.
Okay.
I'm not fully sure that if I understand the whole process, that's why it's kind of open-ended.
So just to summarize what I'm hearing, the question being, how do we find park properties to acquire? Is that
Right,
sort of the
sort of.
question? Okay. All right. No, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding correctly to answer it. Do you have anything else? Any other topics?
That's it, and kind of connecting to what Jonathan was saying. So it's like, can you kind of combine the funding from different locations, like Montaloma neighborhood and a bunch of other neighborhoods, and can that be dedicated to developing something in the shoreline park? Can all be done. All right, that's a straightforward one.
Yeah, and anything else?
That's it. Yeah.
So I think park funds are going to be talked about are you going to talk?
Yeah.
Lindsay's going to dive into it. I see that as a common theme. So I don't want to, well, first of all, I don't know all the details as much as she does. So she'll go into the park funding. But I will tell you from a real estate perspective, we want willing sellers. So for example, like 7-Eleven Calderon, they came to the city and said, hey, would you be interested in buying our property? For 538 Thompson, that was on the market.
Okay.
So but we have a network of, brokers who keep their ear to the ground and tell us what's coming online. We also, it's definitely a collaborative effort between real estate, the parks group, even planning for them to say, hey, this is what we think that this would be a good park site. Can you go out and see if something's available? So I wouldn't say that there's one prescribed method for acquiring park sites. It's just a lot of what's on the market.
Can I ask a follow-up? This triggered one more if I have time. So the follow-up question is like, there are streets which are like dead-end streets, and that can be, made as park. Now, there is a planning involved in it. Have you considered that?
Yeah, we do consider those locations. And again, we want willing sellers.
Right.
So we're not going to go and demand that somebody
Right.
sell their property to us for a park. It's, hey, would you be interested in it?
These are like streets, so it's not a private property. So it'll be
Like public right of way?
yeah.
That would involve Public Works to make a decision that right of way can be vacated for a future park site. Yeah.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for your questions.
Okay, at this time, are there any comments from the public that are online? Please raise your hand.
No raised hands.
Pardon me?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. No, he's. So I will close this part of it and open it back up to the commission on any other comments. There's no action to be taken on this item. It's obviously if we have any other questions or comments moving forward before we go to the next item. Being done there? Go ahead.
Well, I'll just, say for the record, I continue to be pretty disturbed about the amount of parkland in the Ringsdorf and Thompson planning areas. It it's just unbelievably low, at least on that chart, which is attachment 1. 0.44 in Ringsdorf and 2.56 in Thompson, which basically mostly, yeah, how does that add up? Well, anyway, a lot of it is a school site. So I really hope that it looks like there's some effort in that 538 Thompson Avenue to really make a dent there. And I hope you're as concerned about it as I am.
Yeah, definitely a priority.
Yeah.
Commissioner Davis?
No comments. Thank you for the presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And we appreciate your efforts at keeping your ear to the ground.
Yeah.
Next item on the agenda is item 5.2, the Parkland Dedication Fund and park-related projects. And this is a mid-year update for fiscal year 2023 and 24. So, Lindsay taking this one?
Yes,
if you'll just give me
give Lindsay
Not a
a
problem.
moment.
Go ahead.
But I'll give her a little introduction. This is Lindsay Wong. She's our Senior Management Analyst for the Community Services Department, and is one of the staff that directly oversees our Parkland Dedication Fund. As soon as she's ready, she'll walk us through.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. So I will be presenting a mid-year update on our Parkland Dedication Fund, and we'll be giving you a status update on some of our Parkland related projects. And some of your comments on Angela's item definitely might also come up for this item. So there is some overlap between our two topics tonight. So this is an overview of what we will be reviewing tonight. First, I will provide some background on the Parkland Dedication Fund and also the ordinance. We will be looking at the planning areas. And then we'll also talk about Parkland Fund commitments and actions from last fiscal year and review the status of the fund this year. And then we will end by reviewing the status of some Parkland projects. So this is just some quick background. I know that you've all seen this Parkland item a couple of times now, but to just recap, basically in fiscal year 17-18, the PRC did a review of our Parkland acquisition strategy. And one of the outcomes of that review was the request to receive a mid-year update on the Parkland Dedication Fund. So this item is also just an update. We're not recommending any commitments tonight of funds, and any commitments for Parkland projects will be brought to PRC in the spring. So this is an overview of the ordinance, which Angela already touched on a little bit. So I'll go through this kind of quickly, but again, our Parkland Dedication Ordinance is chapter 41 of the City Code and follows the Quimby Act, which authorizes cities to require residential subdivisions dedicate land for parks or pay in lieu fees in order to offset the impacts of new residents on our parks and recreation facilities. We also have Council Policy K-15, which prioritizes how the city uses those park funds. The first priority being acquisition of parkland. Second is development of new parks and recreation facilities. And the third priority is rehabilitation or renovation of existing amenities and facilities. Parkland funds cannot be used for maintenance or operations. And in spending the funds, the first consideration is to be given to projects located within the planning area where the fee was collected, then within a 1 mile radius, and then to projects that have a community-wide benefit. And our ordinance outlines the city's goal of achieving 3 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. This is an overview, which Angela showed as well, of the different parks and open space planning areas to just kind of help frame this conversation. This is from our existing parks and open space plan, but we'll look at this as part of our Parks and Recreation strategic plan that we're developing right now. And basically the areas between 101 and El Camino are the planning areas that currently have the lowest acreage and are not meeting that 3 acres per 1,000 residents target. So those are the areas where we like to focus on acquiring more open space. And then Miramonte, Grant, and North Bay Shore are all above 3 acres per 1,000 residents. So this is an overview of our acreage by planning area. So again, highlighted in red are the areas that have the lowest acreage per 1,000 residents. This is based on 2010 census data. So through the Parks and Rec strategic plan, we will be updating this with 2020 census population data. So these numbers might change a little bit. And then also this table does not include the recently acquired parkland and the future park sites that Angela mentioned in her presentation. And then also I want to point out one clarification on the attachment that was included in tonight's report, which shows the parkland totals by planning area. That long table, the attachment showed the incorrect total for the Ringstorf planning area, which should be 2.9 total acres for that planning area. So just want to point that out. Thank you, Commissioner Davis, for pointing that out. And then, as I mentioned, and as you all know, we are working on developing our Parks and Recreation strategic plan. So the next phase of the plan will include some parkland related tasks, and that includes updating our acreage by planning area based on that census data, like I mentioned. It will also review the total acreage of our parks and open space and review how we currently count that parks and open space acreage. It'll also provide recommendations for how we should define these different types of open space throughout the city, which includes city-owned parks, school sites, and POPAs, which are privately owned, publicly accessible open space, and any other open space that we maintain. And then also, it will review our parkland ordinance and determine our future parks and open space needs and provide potential strategies to increase funding for those parkland needs. And then sort of dovetailing with that is a park impact fee nexus study that we are preparing for. So for some background on this, the city's housing element includes an objective to prepare a nexus study related to these park impact fees. So the housing element is a state mandated document that was recently adopted by the city, and that document guides the city's housing policies for the next 10 years. And again, it included a nexus study as one of the objectives. A nexus study will demonstrate a reasonable relationship or a nexus between new development and the need for additional parks and recreational facilities, and will establish a legal basis for updating our existing park impact fees and possibly establishing new fees. So basically, the nexus study will evaluate our current park in lieu fees, compare them to other jurisdictions, review our methodology, and potentially recommend other park impact fees, which may include fees for commercial development, for example. So that is all the background on the Parkland Fund. And then I wanted to review commitments of fees that have happened since our last update to PRC in May. So a few of these were part of the fiscal year 23-24 budget adoption process, and I'll just kind of go through these. The first was $1 million to the Wisman Sports Center and Mountain View Sports Pavilion renovations project. Those were funds for re-roofing, replacing bleachers, and other building elements. Second was $1 million to pickleball court design and construction. So that was an existing CIP for the feasibility study, and we committed additional funds so that we had those ready once the feasibility study is complete. The next was $6 million for the design and construction of the park that will be at San Rafael Avenue. Next was $250,000 to the Colony Street connection to the Permanente Creek Trail. So this is a project to enhance the existing trail by adding a residential neighborhood connection at the eastern terminus of Colony Street. The next one was around $227,000 for the Cuesta Park Fitness Court. These were additional funds for the construction of that project. The next one was $1.4 million to the Magical Bridge All-Inclusive Playground Project, and that was, again, additional funds for construction. And then the last one was $3.5 million for construction for Ringstorf Park maintenance and tennis building replacement. And then this is an overview of our current uncommitted or available fees by planning area. So as you can see, there are some planning areas that have little to no fees available, which of course is a challenge when we want to acquire land in those areas or when we want to develop new projects or renovate. So this is again just another reason why we are utilizing our Parks and Rec strategic plan and the upcoming Nexus study to explore different funding strategies for parkland projects. And then this slide shows fees that have already been committed for land acquisition. So the left-hand column has highlighted, again, those areas that have the lowest acreage per 1,000 residents, and it shows the fees that we've already set aside for land acquisition in those planning areas. So that is all of the background and update on the Parkland Fund itself. And now I'm just going to go through projects that have Parkland funds committed. So first slide is just completed projects since our last presentation in May. So the only one we have is Fayette Park, which opened in October. And this is 0.5 acres in the San Antonio planning area. And then this is an overview of Parkland Fund projects that are actively being worked on or managed. So the first is the Sylvan Park trellis replacement and the volleyball court. So this is actually open to the public and essentially complete. There are some small final touches to this, but this is effectively complete, which is exciting. And this is, of course, in the Sylvandale planning area. Next is the Ringstorff Park Aquatic Center. This is still in construction, and our target completion date is spring 2024. That is in the San Antonio planning area. Next is a Magical Bridge Playground, which is in construction. We had the groundbreaking ceremony. There's a little photo of that there not too long ago. The estimated completion date for this will be fall 2024. Next is the pickleball feasibility study. So we have started working with a consultant and are preparing for public outreach for that project. Next is the Ringstorff Park maintenance and tennis building. This project is also in construction with an estimated completion of fall 2024. And then we have a couple of parks here that are in design. So Villa Chiquita Park is in design. We're estimating construction will start spring 2024. And that's in the central planning area. Evelyn Avenue Park, also estimating construction to start actually summer 2024. And that is in the Sylvandale planning area. The Wisman Sports Center and Mountain View Sports Pavilion renovations, multiple interior renovations have been completed at both sites. And the re-roofing of the Mountain View Sports Pavilion has been completed. And then design for the Wisman Sports Center and replacement of HVAC at both sites is expected to start in spring of 2024. The Cuesta Fitness Court construction is expected to start in spring 2024. We're currently out to bid for that one. And then the last one, the Colony Street connection to Permanente Creek Trail is still under construction as well. And then lastly, just want to talk about some future parkland projects. So these are projects that do not yet have funding committed to them, but we are preparing to have these scheduled in our 5-year CIP. So the first one is Eagle Park pool renovations. This will include deck repair and replacement of the bulkhead. The next is the construction of the new park at 7-Eleven Calderon. The Callahan Field lighting upgrade. This is to upgrade the lights to be more energy efficient. The turf replacement at Crittenden. 555 Middlefield, as Angela mentioned, this is a future park site. The LASD future school site. So there's kind of two items with that. There's the school site and the shared use facilities at the school site. And then there's also the California Showers Park, which will be next to the school site. And that's the area that's highlighted in that picture there. The park at 358 Thompson. And then finally, the parks associated with the Google master plans, which Angela also mentioned. So as you can see, we have, again, a lot of future parks or future parkland projects that we are planning for, but again, not actually committing any fees tonight. And that is the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions.
Starting this in. Right. Commissioner Summer?
I have a question. So does the city ever allocate any funds to parks that aren't in the Parkland Dedication Fund, like somewhere else, general fund, shoreline fund, anything like that?
Yeah, so we do, basically every year when we develop the 5-year CIP, if we have park related projects, we collaborate with Public Works to find funding for those projects. First, we go to the Parkland Fund and we use Parkland dedication fees if we have them. But sometimes there are scenarios where we're able to work with Public Works to find other funding sources, whether that's construction and conveyance tax or CIP reserves or a number of other sources, sometimes Shoreline Fund actually there are a number of park projects that are out at Shoreline that aren't included here because we use Shoreline funds rather than the Parkland Fund. And then in terms of acquisition, there also are other funds that sometimes we could tap into for acquisition as well. But I would say for all of those, the Parkland Fund is kind of our first, the first spot that we try to use funds from.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Davis?
Thank you, Lindsay, for the presentation. A question, could you provide clarity around the, I think it was slide 4, first consideration is given to you. Is that, maybe it's
This one,
The last bullet.
the last bullet.
yeah, first consideration. Is that by stat? So that's come up a couple times that it needs to be in the planning area. Is that by statute or policy or?
So that is, I believe that's outlined in our Parkland dedication ordinance. Actually, yeah, so this is outlined in the ordinance itself. And again, we will be reviewing the ordinance and updating it through the Parks and Rec strategic plan, but as of right now, that is kind of how our ordinance guides us through the use of funds.
So the input I would provide is I think there's kind of a partial logic to that. It makes sense for, say, playgrounds, or, the immediacy of use makes a lot of sense. But for other uses like bicyclists or joggers, might be much more interested in the development of green corridors away from their immediate area. So, to some extent, that's a constraint. I understand the intention is, you're putting green space resources where development's occurring, but I wouldn't want to see that become too much of a constraint on other kinds of creative land acquisition. And I hope that does come up in the strategic planning process as a consideration.
I just have one question on the slide on future parkland projects. Am I correct in understanding that at some point each year we have a chance to prioritize what we feel as a commission should be the priorities, and when there's X amount of dollars, but you have X amount of dollars that you need to complete all of them.
Yeah, so typically the way the process has been working is that when we schedule projects in the 5-year CIP, the capital improvement plan, that's adopted with the adoption of the budget at the end of the fiscal year. But in the spring, when we do our parkland update again to PRC, that's our chance to review with you the projects that we are thinking of scheduling in the 5-year CIP. And so we would show you, this park project we want to schedule for next year. We want to commit funds to it. And then we bring it to PRC, and then you would make a recommendation to council to commit those funds. I will say that process happens every 2 years that we're developing a new 5-year CIP. So this is considered an off year. So really the only types of CIP projects that we are scheduling are kind of more urgent ones. It's not necessarily like a full year where we would go through all of these and schedule them. So you might see some of these projects come to you in the spring, but it might be kind of a lighter year. But yes, we do bring it to PRC before we bring that to council.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any others?
I just want
Sure.
to jump in and make a comment to Commissioner Davis. In prehistory, when I was on the Parks and Rec for the first time, the city wasn't necessarily putting the funds the developer fees from a certain neighborhood, they weren't necessarily going into that neighborhood. They were going to, like, the Costa Annex took forever to be paid off. And so neighborhoods had development, but the monies went somewhere else. And that was exceedingly annoying. And I ended up with a Parks and Rec. So the question of, it will be interesting in the strategic plan to see how we fund citywide needs while still providing green spaces to the neighborhoods. Because partly trails are partly also a question of active transportation. So it's not only, I mean, we need to figure out very clearly new sources of funding, which will be a challenge. So I'm looking forward to talking that through.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to open it up to the public here. If there's any comments, Mr. Lambert.
Will you be able to get my slide up?
Yes, I'm pulling it up.
Thank you. My name is Bill Lambert. I'm a resident of the Montaloma neighborhood. I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of Mountain View Parks. I'm really glad that I think we're all sort of aligned that both in the staff report and some of the discussion here that the in lieu fees are just insufficient to provide new park space for Mountain View. This slide is really a sort of a twist on the materials that were presented to us by the staff using similar numbers. It's hard to get the numbers perfect, but fooling around a little bit, it's not going to make much difference. But what I'm presenting here really is the growth of Mountain View from around 2014 with about 74,000 residents to about 90,000 residents in a few years, and showing how the parkland has changed in the north, central, south, and on Mountain View on average, and made clear that I have taken off all school property from the calculations, which I will always do in the presentations, as you are aware. And it really shows that despite our best efforts here, the in lieu fees, what we've done is just sort of really kept pace with the growth in Mountain View, or actually decreased our park space per 1,000 residents. So what this really shows you and emphasizes that we really need to find new ways of funding park space going forward. And we've all talked about being creative, and the next we have 11 months now, right, to come up with a lot of good creative ideas. And one thing I think is important to point out with this discussion here is we talked about the planning areas. To me, the planning areas just chop up Mountain View. We get in lieu fees in little buckets. We never really accumulate enough to make meaningful contributions to park space. Plus, with the Quimby Act, we have this 5-year expenditure timescale. Both of these are huge constraints in a small city like Mountain View. So I don't know what the ability we have to change the planning areas, to modify the Quimby Act requirements. But if we have to ask the state to waive some of these requirements to allow us to better use the park in lieu fees, we should do that, because the way it is now, we are not meeting the objectives of the Quimby Act as it was laid out by the state legislature. And we need some relief with that. So thank you very much. Look forward to the rest of it.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert.
And please read if the staff hasn't read it, please read what I sent in.
Did you want to speak at all?
No, I have like so many questions that won't be.
Unfortunately, it's got to be just addressed. Yeah.
I'll reserve them for now. So,
do we have anybody online? If you have anybody online that would like to speak to this item, if you'd raise your hand.
No hands are raised.
Hands raised. All right. Then we'll close the public comment and come back to commission. Any comments?
No, I see a consistent stream of opinion that I think has many common attributes about really needing to shake some of the constraints of our typical planning and acquisition processes and getting creative. And if that means looking at new methods of using and acquiring land, that's really, I really hope that gets studied carefully in the strategic plan. I think I'm reiterating things that have been said different ways by all of us.
Summer?
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I like being able to talk about this a couple times a year because it's obviously kind of a burning issue for the city. And it's, it's good to get the public a chance to weigh in. I love that list of active projects and future projects. I mean, keep up the good work on that. But I do have a concern that there's sort of this tension between kind of comprehensively planning the park network and figuring out, how to connect it all together and taking a good planning look versus just putting a park where developers want to develop something new. And some of that, I think, has led to the kind of disparity between the different planning areas where in a more single family neighborhood that's built out, that's not the type of place you're going to see somebody putting a high density residential development, and therefore they collect no fees. And so they're sort of left having to, cities left having to figure out what to do differently. Some of that is the legacy that passed before the Quimby Act was passed, and those areas were subdivided probably in the 50s, or I don't know exactly when, but there wasn't as much emphasis on creating parks. But so, I would like to see us be a little more proactive. And I know in real estate, you never want to put a dot on a map because then the price goes up. But, expressing what we want to see in some of these under the park served neighborhoods a little bit more in our general plans. And I know there's an update in the near future and maybe the park strategic plan can talk a little bit more about what we think the appropriate strategy is. But I will say that the perspective that Mr. Lambert shared really resonates for me. And, while I do find value in the half-acre mini parks, I'm hoping that we're not just going to end up with mini parks as our only park facility, because it's sure hard to play, a good game of softball on a mini park. Clearly something more needs to be done. And I know there's a variety of things being discussed, but definitely some problem that needs solving. Thank
you. Commissioner Brown?
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. It was crisp and clear. Just great. Thank you. I look very much forward to the strategic plan where we can kind of impose the vision of where we want parks and where we want connections and how to connect. I'm very much a believer in the small parks, but everything needs to be connected so people can easily access parks. So, and that's the strategic plan. So I'm greatly looking forward to that conversation.
Commissioner Mitchell?
I think you expressed it well, both your comments before and after.
I would agree. And thank you, Mr. Lambert, for your taking the time on yours, and hoping that maybe you'll share with council as well. Without that, we do not have an action item on this. It's just a receipt. And again, thank you for a very thorough report. Lindsay, great job. Appreciate it. Okay. The next thing on the agenda is item 5.3, which is the Community Service Department's proposed budget request for fiscal year 2024-25.
That is also me. Let me just pull up my.
Are we lucky?
Let me just pull up my presentation for that one. Yeah. Okay. So our next item is to go over our operating budget. So I will be just providing a high-level overview of the current fiscal year as well as our budget requests for next fiscal year. So this is the typical budget timeline that we follow. So in December, as a department, we compile our budget requests for the next fiscal year and we submit them to our internal budget review team. We bring this update to PRC in January every year to just provide you an overview of our budget requests. In February, Finance brings a mid-year budget update to Council that includes an update on the current fiscal year and projections for the end of the year. And in February, we also have a budget meeting with our finance team and the city manager. And in that meeting, we bring any feedback that PRC might have to that discussion. And then the recommended budget is brought to council in June and provides an overview of the end of the fiscal year and the final budget recommendations for the next year. And then later in June is the second and final hearing for the adopted budget. So this is a snapshot of the current fiscal year's budget citywide as compared to last fiscal year. So as you can see, revenues are projected to be around $17 million higher, and expenditures are also quite a bit higher. The budget forecast for fiscal year 24-25 at the time of the budget adoption in June was projected with this modest positive balance, with smaller positive balances projected for later fiscal years. And so given that, staff have been advised to extend some caution with our budget requests, and requests are considered on an individual basis with an emphasis on how they are critical to contributing to the city's strategic priorities or council goals. And then the mid-year budget report to council in February will include a more detailed budget projection for the upcoming fiscal year. So this is an overview of the Community Services Department's operating budget for the current fiscal year. Showing a breakdown of our expense budget by division. So some notes on this slide. Performing arts is a division of our department. It's included here, but we won't be going over performing arts budget requests in this presentation, just because they have a separate advisory body that they work with, which is the Performing Arts Committee. Another note, the Shoreline Division is funded out of the Shoreline Regional Park Community Fund, while the rest of these divisions are funded by the General Fund. Golf and restaurant are funded by money out of the general fund. We take it out of the general fund and put it in the golf and restaurant subfund for the year. And then at the end of the year, we anticipate them to exceed their revenues and we return that revenue back to the general fund. And then parks and open space is the highest budget because of water usage and park maintenance costs, including all of our staffing. And then this is a breakdown of the department's budgeted revenues. This is not our actual revenue, but just what we have in our budget. Golf and restaurant, recreation, and performing arts are the department's highest areas of revenue. Parks and forestry receive some smaller amounts of revenue. Mostly those are reimbursements for maintenance contracts or things like that. Last year, we met our revenue targets and we ended the year at 112% to our revenue budget, which is great. And so the meat of this is to kind of go over these budget requests for the upcoming fiscal year, 24-25. So as a reminder, these requests are for the shoreline, parks, recreation, and forestry divisions. So first we have non-discretionary requests. So these are requests that are usually tied to contractual increases or things that are seen as necessary to continue our existing operations and level of service. So the first is a request for electricity, water, and supplies and materials associated with new parks and amenities. So this is a standard request that we include every few years as we open new parks. It's determined based on just, an estimated cost per acre. This year's request is intended to cover costs for Fayette Park, as well as upcoming parks, Evelyn and Villa, and also the new amenities at existing parks, including Rainstorf Park Aquatic Center and Magical Bridge. Next is a request to increase our median landscape maintenance contract. So this request is for additional funds for our contractor that maintains our roadway landscape medians. We increased the scope of that contract in fiscal year 22-23, and we are now requesting some funds to cover annual cost increases to that contract. as well as some parcels that were not captured in the original scope of the contract. Next is for the mowing contract at Shoreline. So this is for funds to cover the increased cost of mowing services at Shoreline. So we have a contractor who does 2 to 3 mowings per year. This is both for environmental and wildlife purposes, as the burrowing owls require short vegetation in order to nest. So it's essential that we mow, as well as for safety and fire suppression purposes. So the cost of this has just increased year over year to the point that we can no longer absorb it in our budget. So we need some funding for that. And then last non-discretionary request is an increase to our janitorial contract. So we use a janitorial contractor to service our facilities on a regular basis, as well as some increased service when we have special events. So this request is just to pay for annual increases to our contractor rates for that. Next, we have discretionary requests. So these are significant change requests that are ongoing and not considered necessary to continue our current level of operations, but they are still high priorities for the department. The first is for the addition of 3 parks and open space workers. So our team of parks and open space workers are responsible for monitoring Shoreline, our urban parks, and our trail system. So their duties include patrolling and responding to complaints at those areas, checking in on barbecue reservations at our parks, performing trail counts, implementing trail closures and detours, and supporting shoreline projects and special events, among other duties. Our current team is only 3 parks and open space workers who are responsible for providing that level of service to the whole city, which it can create significant delays in responding to some of those issues. Given that limited staff, we at times only have 1 parks and open space worker who is available and who is responsible for responding to issues around the city. So this is also becoming more of an issue given that, you know, we've continued to add to our park space, and also just given the increased usage of our parks and open space and outdoor spaces. So the addition of the 3 staff would ensure that we're able to meet community needs in an efficient and timely manner. Next is a request to increase our contracts budget for youth sports and youth and adult recreation classes and camps. So we utilize a number of vendors to provide classes, camps, and activities for the community. These programs are revenue generating for the city. And this request amount of $86,000 represents the net total. So that's accounting for both the expense increase and an offsetting revenue. Over the past few years, our revenue targets have actually been adjusted, but the expense line has not been increased accordingly, which is why this is still a small net expense for the city. So this request allows us to continue to provide our increased programming to the public, and also it accounts for increased contractor rates. Next is a full-time day porter service at the senior center. So this is to increase our janitorial contract to add full-time day porter service at the senior center. So currently the senior center is only serviced for a few hours per day, as well as janitorial services at night. But this request kind of aligns the senior center with the model of the community center, and this is needed given the high usage of the senior center. So there are over 200 meals served at lunch per day at the senior center. There's daily drop-in programs, classes, heavy use of the exercise equipment, and special events. So this full-time service will just ensure consistent cleaning, timely responses to any emergency janitorial issues, and also will allow for efficient setup and breakdown of the classroom spaces. Next is a request for college and career programs for teens. This funding is to continue to provide these programs at the Teen Center, and it includes college trips, workshops, and special events for teens and parents focused on academic, leadership, and communication skills to prepare teens for future college and career endeavors. This is all free programming that we offer to teens, and we were previously able to provide some of this due to donation money that we had received, which has since been expended. Next, we have a request for a parks maintenance worker. So we're requesting an additional parks maintenance worker to support the increase in maintained parks and open space throughout the city, again, as well as the addition of some of the larger new amenities and new projects. So this position would specifically support Ringstorff Park. which currently only has 2 maintenance staff assigned to it, despite the size of it and despite all these new projects that we're adding there, including the Aquatic Center, Magical Bridge. So we're just anticipating increased usage of that park and need additional staffing resources to maintain it. And then lastly, we have the Urban Forest Outreach and Education contract. So this is to continue a contract service that we use that provides outreach and education programs to help support the preservation and enhancement of the city's urban forest. So our contractor offers educational workshops, tree plantings, tree care training for staff, and other outreach programs. Previously, the contract had been funded by various one-off funding sources. So this is just a request to be able to use them on an ongoing basis. So lastly, we have a few one-time requests. These are what the city calls limited period requests. And these are just basically like one-time purchases. I have another note on this one. The report for this item, or the report, showed a total of $261,000 for one-time requests. That number is incorrect because it also includes a performing arts center request that's not outlined here because, again, we just don't really review the performing arts requests here. So this is the total for the divisions that we're reviewing today. So the first request is to replace the tables at the senior center. We offer a lot of classes at the senior center. We use those tables for the classes and rentals. And I think the current tables are from 2006, so they're showing a lot of wear and tear. The next one is for a kiln replacement at the senior center. The kiln is used for ceramics classes, and it's currently not completing a firing cycle. The next one is for the purchase of commercial treadmills at the senior center. So again, the senior center exercise room is very popular, and the treadmills are used at a really high level every day. And given that the current treadmills have had some issues, they've required repairs. I think at least one of them is inoperable right now. And the current treadmills that we have are more suited for like a residential, like a home, and not the high level of usage that we get. So we're requesting to purchase commercial type machines. The next request is for an electric vehicle for the downtown parks crew. So over the last budget cycle, we've added staffing and other resources to support the downtown crew and the Castro Street pedestrian mall. So this request is for the appropriate sized vehicle to get around that area and be able to maintain the Castro Ped Mall in downtown. The next one is for a compact SUV for the shoreline supervisor. So this is a vehicle for the supervisor that oversees the Parks and Open Space Worker program that I mentioned, the environmental program, and various projects in shoreline and North Bay Shore, as well as on the trails. Those responsibilities require the supervisor to be able to quickly and efficiently travel around shoreline. And currently the shoreline manager and the supervisor don't have access to a city vehicle to respond to those issues. And then the last one is for new vehicles for the Parks and Open Space workers that we're requesting to add. So given the additional staff that we're adding, they also need vehicles to respond to the situations that they're responding to around the city. So this is a summary of all the one second. For some reason,
It's not a PRC meeting without a technical.
I know, right? For some reason, my slides are working here, but they're not. Let me just saving there.
Yeah, do you want to unplug it?
Sure.
We know all the stuff that goes into the summary, it's okay.
Yeah, the summary is just everything I already went over.
Stop sharing on the module. There you go.
I'll plug it back in.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can pull it.
Okay. That was literally the last slide. It was just a summary of
Oh man,
all the
just keeping it
requests.
interesting.
So basically, I'll just tell you that the summary of all those requests, the total net amount is around 1.2 million. And then the next steps for this is that, again, in February, we have a budget review meeting with the city manager's office and with finance. So there's no action tonight. We're just, again, providing you an update, and we can answer any questions or take any feedback that you have on those
I'll
requests
start
and
down
budget
this side.
items.
Commissioner Mister, questions?
I asked my questions in advance.
Okay,
Thank you.
Commissioner Brett.
Yes, I'm wondering about the ongoing discretionary. Next year, we won't see those. They'll be folded into the regular budget.
Correct. Yeah.
And I might as well just make my comment now. I'm glad that emphasis is being put on maintenance. Because developing parks is just great, but we have to have the maintenance to take care of them. And I'm looking forward to the strategic plan. As we change what we see trees and plants doing in the city, we will need maintenance and different types of maintenance. So thinking about adding maintenance so that we have what we want to take care of it. I greatly support that. Thank you.
Commissioner Summer.
Thank you. I appreciated the question that Commissioner Mishner asked about the match for the 86,000 of discretionary funds and the recreation expenses. But I got confused by the answer. And I think you're saying that yes, the expenses are matched by revenue, but I'm not sure that's what it's saying.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we talked about trying to explain this in a way that makes sense. So, okay. I don't really need to pull it up again, but I'll just go back to that slide. If it's on here. So the $86,000 is the net request that we're requesting. So basically, what we're doing is requesting to increase our expense line by, I want to say it's over $600,000 to basically increase the contracts that we're paying for. And that's because the contract rates themselves have gone up. For more background, we haven't increased that contract expenditure line since I think fiscal year 18-19. And so since that time, we've been adding more contracts and we've been basically finding ways to absorb this in other parts of our budget. But we're at a point where we really need to add the appropriate budget line to be able to pay for those increased contracts. They are offset by a large amount of revenue. I think the revenue amount is also like over $500,000. And so the way that the contracts are structured, they are cost recovery. So when we pay a vendor, basically we collect all of the registration for their classes. We then pay them a portion of that revenue. So we're always generating revenue from those programs. The reason that this request is not, so me explaining that, you would expect that this request would be fully offset by revenue. The reason that it's not is because in those last few years, the revenue lines have actually been adjusted. So I think what's happened is that when we work with finance, especially during COVID, as our revenue has kind of fluctuated year over year, we have adjusted our revenue lines. And so we've said, you know, this year we're going to bring in this much more revenue. So we've adjusted those by a certain amount, but we haven't actually put in the request to adjust the expense line. So what's happened is basically that ratio of revenue to expense has kind of gotten off a little bit. And so this request is to correct it and to recognize the appropriate amount of expense and the appropriate amount of revenue. So in our budget, you will see that the revenue that we're bringing in will offset the expenses. It's just that in order to get there, we have to actually increase the expense line a little bit more because it was kind of behind the revenue, if that makes sense.
I understand now why you answered.
It's a little bit messy,
yeah. You already were accounting for the revenue. Now you just
so the kind of
offset.
So the bottom line is that moving forward, if you look at our expenses and our revenues will be offsetting those contract classes fully.
All right. I've after reading this, I thought that we were actually going to be incurring an additional 86,000 of expense, but that's not the case. It's actually matching what you already had in the revenue.
Exactly. Column. And so also just one more thing I'll clarify is that basically what was happening is we were, again, bringing in all of the revenue associated with those classes. but the revenue wasn't necessarily budgeted. So we were like bringing in an amount of revenue over our budget. This is just actually correcting the budget line so that it shows the appropriate revenue that we would be expecting every year.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we are incurring additionally. Are you saying there was a negative last year? I mean, this is an increase in spending, a net increase in spending.
Yeah, so were you going over budget on expenses in the past or, and this is to
Yes.
sort of
Yes.
correct for that?
Yes,
Yeah.
so we were, and again, absorbing it in other areas of our department budget, and yeah, so this is correcting that.
See what you stirred up?
Yep.
No, it's a good question to
No, it's
clarify,
right.
and yeah.
Do you have any?
That was all I had
Commissioner Davis?
question wise, thanks.
So I guess in city departmental parlance, a budget request is really that increase spending over typical pro forma budget. So it's the incremental increases. Are there any areas in the budget where there's decreasing expenses? Probably not. But I guess as a commissioner or as a person in the corporate world that looked at budgeting, we used to see revenue and expense, and in the PRC we kind of see net changes, so it's hard to get a real budget picture. We see budget increases. Next year it'd be kind of interesting actually to see some revenue trends for the recreation programs, for the golf course, things like that. I don't have a feel for how those things are trending. I understand expenses increase over time.
Can I answer your last question for you?
Sure.
So we're showing you the net, and in some of these cases, we are pulling from wages, for example, to provide some revenue offset for some of the personnel requests. So like in a perfect world, yes, we're going to ask for, let's say it's 200,000 for a position. But if we have some unused wages and we see a trend that over the last couple of years, we haven't been, then we will say, here's our contribution towards this request. And now it brings down the request to 175,000. So we go through a process. That's what finance wants us to look at first, is what funds do we currently have access to that maybe are underutilized or could be reallocated in a different way. And in addition to that, there are requests that you're not even seeing that we were able to make that accommodation. An example of that is I needed wages for our recreation specialist for the garden. It's not funded appropriately. We never increased it since we added Latham. I originally put in a request, but then behind the scenes, we go through and say, hey, you know what? It's a smaller dollar amount. Let's go look within our existing budget and find a way that we can fund it that's not going to negatively impact any other existing programs. And in that case, we were able to take from a program area that we were streamlined in our staffing in a positive way and had additional funds that we can allocate to that position. So we go through this practice before we bring stuff to the budget review team to show our best effort that we are looking for other offsets, not just revenue, but also existing budget that may not be utilized fully.
Yeah, as a PRC commissioner, I want you to be robustly resourced as a taxpayer and representative of the community. If it was incumbent upon us to or make sure there is financial discipline. There's two other questions. So the canopy, the last line there, the canopy contract. I think that's all canopy.
Yes.
Is that an increase or is that the total amount of the?
So this is the annual amount that we're requesting on an ongoing basis, and it is a small increase over what we currently pay them annually. And so this contract is kind of has been funded through different funding sources over the last few years. So at some point we had some
Sustainability funds for 2 years.
Yeah, so like one-time sustainability funding that we were able to use to start that contract. I think at one point it was funded through the CIP, but now we're actually requesting to just fund it ongoing so that we don't have to ask for additional funding every year to pay for it. And the current contract is a little bit less than that. So we did build in an anticipated increase, knowing that, their rates might go up every year.
And then similarly for the college career team program, something school should do, but I guess it's good that the city's doing it too. 37,000 is the increase in that program cost.
So this one currently, these are programs that we currently are offering, and we've been using funding that was donated to us.
Yeah.
A few years ago, basically, we had a lump sum donated for this specific purpose. We've been spending that. We basically are going to fully expend that. And so we're asking to kind of replace that one-time money that we had through donations with actual budgeted funds every year. So that is the current amount that we spend.
The program, it's just now getting pulled into
Correct. And that's mostly for like other contractors. I think
it's mostly for our contract services line, which could include transportation. So the cost of busing, for example, is expensive, as well as for any special materials and supplies that we may need to implement the event, or admission fees, or to pay a vendor to provide a workshop that would be of interest to the teens. And the original funding, we received 3 years of funding from LinkedIn when the Teen Center was opened in 2014, then again in 15, then again in 16, I believe I have those years right. And over the last couple of years, we've been trying to figure out what's the perfect puzzle piece to not only spend that funding, but also what are the programs that are going to attract the teens and be a positive impact on the teens and their families. And so it's been kind of nice to play this exercise of, does this fit? No. Does this work? Yeah. All right, let's try it again. And so you've heard a presentation from our recreation coordinator, Lauren Eck, on our teen programs and a lot of the programs that she had mentioned, such as the Adulting 101, the college trips, and the Find Your Fit Career Day. Those are the type of programs that will be funded with these funds moving forward. We no longer have those funds. We finally exhausted it. It took us 9 years to exhaust those funds, but happy to actually find a formula that fits and that works for our current teen population.
And how many teens on an annual basis will participate in the college?
The college trips?
Well,
or just in general? College
and career programs.
That's a great question. I believe it comes out to, I'm going to go around 250 to 300 kids. Our Find Your Fit event that is part of this funding, we've offered it now for 2 years, and in those 2 years, we've seen growth. And we are planning on having the next one in March. I believe registration might even be open, and last year we filled up really quick. And that's around 75 to 100 teens just there. Our college trips range about 20 to 25. And then the Adulting 101 has a little bit more depth because some of that includes programs for adults. So for parents to learn about opportunities for funding for college, or to go and hear also about different avenues, maybe not college, maybe a trade school, maybe just going to get your AA. And so the parents also participate. So it has a pretty good depth. And what's really nice about these programs is that they bring in kids that maybe normally don't attend the teen center, and they come to the teen center to experience the program and go, wow, look at what else is going on. And so it's really helped drive membership for the teen center as well.
Thanks. We're just doing questions now.
Yeah, just
right?
questions.
Okay.
I had two, excuse me, quick ones. One is, I know for the last year to 18 months, we had open positions where we weren't using monies that were allocated. Now that we filled several of those positions, are we going to be okay going forward with regards to funding as we are used to? Now that those are full, and does this cover everything that we need to cover now that we have those positions filled?
That is a great question. And I can definitely say, for example, that recreation contract class and camp one, last year we were able to utilize existing salary savings to cover our expenses last fiscal year, which is why we're then asking for it this year. As you're aware, and as you've noted, we are definitely in the process of filling our positions. And I believe there's been new instruction from finance on how we can use salary savings and at what point we can make that request and how much funds we've saved already. So we are moving forward as if we're not to be relying on salary savings, and that's where we've come up with these requests.
Thank you on that one. The other one, I think is pretty simple. When we talk about the median crews and are the medians on El Camino or the expressway, because they are county and state owned, do they contribute any funding towards that, or is that all on us, even though it's their road?
They do. They pay us for maintenance. It's not a huge sum, but
Yeah, that's actually some of the
revenue that we bring in.
laptop I want. Some of the revenue
Yeah.
that we bring on the
It
other
was noted,
side. For parks and forestry, that's some of that revenue is actually that they reimburse us for some of those maintenance contracts.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Any other questions before we open up?
My only question, did this get sent out to us, this presentation?
No.
Okay, so you could send it out, yes.
All right, at this time, I'll open it up to the public here. My dynamic duo.
So thanks for the I didn't know that this much of effort goes into it. Like it's great. Thank you for bringing it to the notice. One comment is like in terms of reporting. I think now I'll get the nomenclature right. Commissioner Davis. So in terms of execution is one part. Like reporting, it makes sense to kind of figure out what exactly was expended and how much was available. So that what's the percentage which is left out. Just a comment. I mean, it could be super complicated. So I'm just scratching the surface in terms of getting that, but it would be more comprehensible in terms of seeing that, hey, what's the actual spend? It's just like a tally sheet, right? In a corporate document, like a financial document. That's comment. On the revenue generating sources like golf courses and bunch of places, how do you kind of monitor what's the KPI? How do you measure that this is working or not working? The other program, the teens program, is like fabulous way to do that. But for golf, and these are like more revenue generating. So how can we kind of make it better? Is there a way to kind of look at that? That's one question. I had another one, lost my chain of thought. So that's fun. When I get the other one, I'll get back to it. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, I can respond to some of that. So in terms of reporting, so we do internally, we track our revenues really closely, and we do, monthly. I actually compile reports that I send to the management team, and we're looking at those revenues. I meet with the management team regularly to track our internal revenues and see where we're at. We don't typically report that level of detail in these presentations, but it is something that we're on top of. And then also in terms of kind of tracking our performance, we do have performance measures that we report in the adopted budget book that we also track internally, and that we check in on, a few times a year. Also, in regards to those performance measures, we are working citywide. We're working with a consultant right now to actually kind of review our performance measures, see what makes sense, and change those for the next fiscal year. But some of those are tied to, things like how many program participants are we serving. There are some golf measures. We're changing those a little bit, but the main thing that we're tracking with golf is just to make sure that we are cost recovery with how we're operating the golf course. So that will likely be one of our performance measures in the future. But that's kind of, I guess the kind of short answer is that we do track a lot of that internally.
Can I add one more to that golf part? The reason, sorry.
We're really not equipped to go ahead and have an answer back and forth. It's not a study session. So if you want to make another comment, because you didn't use your oath 3 minutes, we'll certainly allow that. But
sure,
we can't anticipate just back and forth questions.
Okay, fine. Yeah, I mean, I'll just finish it up because golf course is like the quality of the golf course, shoreline golf course, has been deteriorating. That's one of the reasons to bring that up specifically. So can that be made as a comment, and how can that be measured in terms of the outcome for these investments that we're making? So that's one comment. Last one on the partnership side, LinkedIn, you mentioned fund some of these. Have you explored partnerships with like other companies that are in and around shoreline area, and can something be done proactively for that? That's it. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to see if there's anybody online that would like to speak to this item. And please raise your hand.
Yes, we have Mary DeTeo.
All right. Mary, do you hear us?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
And we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Mary, I'd like to just let you know you have 3 minutes and I will let you know when you're down to 1 minute left.
Oh, thank you very much. Um, Thank you very much for sharing the budget with us. And I noticed that it includes multiple new vehicles. And I just want to say, I'm hoping that an extremely strong effort is made to make sure that all of those new electric vehicles are, sorry, all those new vehicles are all electric and none of them are fueled with fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Anybody else, Allison?
I don't think so. Give me 1 second.
Again, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand.
I don't see anybody else. No more hands raised.
Okay, we don't seem that there's no other hands raised. We'll go ahead and close public comment this time and come back to the commission. And I'll start with Commissioner Davis.
Just with the compelling revenue generation from the golf course, I think we should build another one.
We can fill in the bay for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eminent domain in Montaloma.
There we go. Commissioner Summer.
Sure, thanks. Well, I'll just say that I'm supportive of all the CSD budget requests that are before us tonight, and the total amount, the net request seems pretty conservative in the context of the entire CSD budget. And I do want to particularly call out my support for the teen college and career program. Coming from the point of view of the public high school district, what the city is doing is pretty unique and different than what they're doing at MBLA high school district, and in particular, kind of taking a group of teens to visit the colleges together is something that no one that going in those high schools would have gotten to do. They would have gone with their parents or maybe one big pack kind of. I mean, looking at what the city was doing, I think it's really worth supporting. And also some of the alternatives to college, I think, are also unique. The high school district does provide a lot of support, even to the extent they provide kind of an online dashboard to help the students, and they have, lots of programs and such. But what the city is doing is reaching a different population, and I think we should be very supportive of it.
Yeah. Commissioner Bryant?
Thank you. I've already said that I think that the emphasis on maintenance is really important, and I hope that it's very commendable to try to be frugal and find money where there didn't appear to be money, but being very clear about what the needs are to support really good programs, I think is critical. And while I appreciate using salaries that are not being used to fund important programs, I think it's really good to have the programs that we really believe in, to have them written out and funded. And then if the salary savings, I don't know, it can always go into the general fund or whatever, but what we believe in should be written out. So I'm glad that's happening.
We don't want salary savings. We want people in those positions.
Yeah.
So we don't want salary savings.
Are you saying you hate doing 3 different jobs? Like a year and a half?
I'm just still like buzzing that I have an urban forestry manager.
Commissioner Mitchell.
I'm just, I concur with Commissioner Bryant. It's good to quote unquote fix the budget so that this robbing Peter to pay Paul, it's sort of, that's good within a fiscal year. Maybe it sort of works strategically, but it's good to get things in their proper buckets. And so I think these are all reasonable requests, and I wish you luck as all the departments submit all their stuff, and there's a finite amount of money, and good luck. I look forward to the update to see what actually makes it into the final recommendation to council.
Thank you all. I have nothing else to add other than also wishing Lindsay luck, and we're not going to hold it over your head, but we do expect. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much for your presentation. Presentations, I should say, plural. So. Next item on the agenda is item 5.4, which is election of officers. It's that time of year. And so at this point, Commissioner Mitscher.
So, first I want to thank and commend Chair Felios on doing a great job this past year leading our meetings. I think all our meetings ran smoothly. I feel like we had meaningful and interesting discussion amongst us and with staff on things that came up. I thought that there was respectful input from residents. And I also commend you for being the leading our transition to hybrid meetings, as well as people who had to work with some of the technical stuff. But I know that when you're leading a meeting, it's hard enough. And then when you have to throw in the hybrid stuff, it gets challenging and you did a great job with everything this year. So thank you very much. Sort of in keeping with our practice of rotating leadership positions, so that, all the commissioners have sort of a predictable opportunity to share in those roles. I will nominate Commissioner Summer as chairperson for this coming year and Commissioner Davis as vice chair this coming year.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
We still need to open it to the public,
Okay.
I think, for public comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Public in-house, dynamic duo, as I've referred to you. Are you okay with no comments? Okay. Online, are there any comments on?
No.
Nope, no
Thank
hands
you.
up. All right, we'll come back to us. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and vote on it if that's okay with everybody. Okay, Commissioner Mitscher?
Yes.
Commissioner Bryant?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yeah, my only reservation is now Sandy will speak last, and that's impediment to my understanding of
Maybe I'll
things.
say less this way.
So yes, I support.
Commissioner Zimmer?
Yes.
And I enthusiastically vote for both of them as well. So,
Congratulations.
congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Oh, yes.
You
well,
get to take on items 6 and 7.
I do. Okay, well, thank you. And I really appreciate all your leadership this last year. So I think we're on to item 6, which is commission and staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports.
All right, well, I will step on in. Last meeting, I mentioned during this item that we will have a new recreation manager, Colin James. He is here in the flesh. This is Colin. Colin was promoted to the recreation manager position on December 25th. Happy holidays to him. He has been with the city for 10 years, starting as a recreation coordinator and moving his way up the channels to recreation supervisor, where he recently was overseeing sports, aquatics, and facility reservation. So very happy to be able to have Colin move into this role and also have the ability to promote within the organization. So
Thank you.
Colin, anything you'd like to say?
No, I'm just really excited for the new role, and I'm excited to take on the challenge. So thank you. If you have any questions for me, feel free. I'm open, so.
Very, very happy for Colin to be in this role, and we're working on a transition to then fill his supervisor position once HR says they're ready. And then I just have 2 updates for the recreation division. First, the recreation division is currently putting the finishing touches on the spring and summer activity guide. This is our biggest edition that goes out. It's fun. We end summer and we immediately start planning the following summer. And so this activity guide, it'll be mailed out to residents in mid-February with registration beginning in March 2nd. We already have families asking, so what are the camp schedules? Like, hold on, we're not ready yet. And the last one I have is that the city is doing a double header of events on Saturday, February 10th. From 9 to 11, we have a senior center pancake breakfast for those that are over 55 years of age and their guests. The senior center is currently selling tickets, and last year we sold out with about 100 or so people in attendance, and expect the same this year. And then from 10 to 2 over at the community center, the recreation division, in collaboration with the city manager's office, is hosting the 2nd annual Lunar New Year event. Last year, this event was solely put on by the city manager's office, and it was a great success. And they said, hey, come help. And so our team is bringing our event background to their planning and helping create another successful event. And the event will feature various performances, crafts, games, and community booths. So very excited. We're already hitting event season already. It's a little too early. Normally it's not until like March or April for us, but we're jumping on in. Okay. Well, I believe that's it for us.
Good. Does anyone from the commission have any updates? Okay, since there's no action on any of those items, I don't think there's any public input on it. And we've gotten to the end of the meeting. So it's time to adjourn. Get to bang the gavel.
Yeah,
Go do it. Do it. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.